Thank you very much, Isabella, and a warm welcome to everybody here today. It's wonderful to be here and to see everybody in person, and a warm welcome to Catherine. Thank you for agreeing to be here in conversation with me. I get the lovely job of just asking you lots of interesting questions and hearing all about your experience. So, Catherine, this is the first session of the Social Research Association's conference today, but actually we're going to be talking about evaluation for the next 35-40 minutes. And so I thought to ease us in, and for anybody who's perhaps slightly less familiar, can you tell us what evaluation is and perhaps how it differs to social research?
That's a trick question. What is evaluation? So evaluation is, oh my God, I feel like this is a test. The systematic approach to understanding the difference that something has made, I would say. So whether that's impact, whether it's better or worse, or whether it's how that difference came about or to who. So essentially, when I'm talking about evaluations or convincing people to do them, it's the answer to the question, do you want to know what your thing did?
Very nice. Brilliant. So, you've had a lot of roles now in social research and in evaluation, but I know you've had quite a squiggly career to get there. I know you started in a frontline operational role in prison, and I know at one point you thought whether to join the police or train up as a solicitor. So what attracted you to a career in social research and evaluation?
Yeah, so I did. When I first left university, I had like the dream of helping people, right? I think lots of people have that, I want to do something good in the world. So yeah, I joined the prison service. And then I sort of got a little bit frustrated with just helping individuals. I was in the psychology department. So I then joined sort of a headquarters function. Headquarters wasn't quite doing it. So then I joined an inspectorate on a national level, and it still was quite frustrating. And I got to realize that actually maybe policy was the way, trying to change the way government itself, so all of the sort of big national functions it does, that would be something to do. And actually it's great to see my old head of profession, Richard Bartholomew, who's did a fantastic job in nurturing me as an early career social researcher, and I'm very grateful to him for his time and encouragement. I joined the Department for Education. When you join government, in fact, we were just literally having that conversation here before. You join the Government Social Research fast stream. I didn't even really understand I was a government social researcher before I joined the fast stream, but turned out it was a thing. And I was the only social research fast streamer in Department for Education. And you just get put, right? You get put in a central pot and then moved around, and lucky dip, I got education. And I guess that's the beautiful thing about government, is that once you're in, you then have a skill. And I think that's something that people underestimate when you're a researcher or an evaluator. You have a fundamental set of skills that mean you can work on all sorts of different things, because essentially you're problem solvers, you're creative solutions, like you are coming up with ways to help people tackle problems and give them insights. And it made me realize, before I'd had a really focused, narrow perspective on how I could do that, but entering government and seeing that I could work on anything from bureaucracy to what works in international development made me realize I had much better transferable skills. So I'd encourage most people to not feel, although a lot of us feel like, I know my topic really well, I'm an expert. You're not. Well, you are, but you're not just that. You are something much broader than that, and that's enabled me to move around, do a broader variety of jobs, and to be able to make the most of the opportunities available. Because otherwise, essentially, I think I got to the point where I was sort of waiting for someone to die for the promotion for the next stage up, and they were never going to leave. They'd been in that job for years. So it was make the move and do something else and use your skills, or stay where you are. And so yeah, I've moved around a lot.
Brilliant. And it's led you to the task force.
Did.
So can you tell us very briefly, what is the task force and what are you trying to achieve?
Okay, so I was on maternity leave when the task force was created, and someone rang me and said, oh, you should really think about applying for this thing. And I thought it was something that involved like maybe a cape or like knocking down doors and shining a torch into people's eyes and asking, are you evaluating? It's not as exciting, I'm afraid. So it's a joint cabinet office treasury unit. So the reason that it was set up, and I'm very grateful for the people who helped us set it up, and for the team that actually do the hard work, is that Treasury has all the sort of spending levers. So in government, for us to spend anything, the Treasury has to approve that. It has to say, oh yes, you Department for Education, your allocation is this, and in order for you to deliver your objectives, we'd like the following information back to make sure you're spending that correctly. So great that we're linked to Treasury, because everywhere money goes, right, means that actually that's where decisions get made, and that enables us to sort of make nudges. Decisions in government aren't made alone. A lot of those decisions are political. So Cabinet Office half helps us have a lot of political influence, helps us, it's almost like a headquarters function of government, helps us sort of get involved in all of the sorts of processes and procedures that help us shift. So I can essentially, my job is to increase the number and quality of evaluations in government and to make sure those evaluations are fed in at the right point so that the key decisions government has to make are the most informed they can be. And if we don't know, then we're testing. But ultimately, a lot of culture change isn't the individual evaluations that we try to force departments to do. It's actually the bigger, broader changes, like we're introducing an evaluation registry to get basically evaluations much more publicly available, so it's easier to see the results of stuff that we've done. And actually, we can't hide away from results that we don't like because they should appear on the register and there should be an incentive to publish. Now, those sorts of things are going to cause a much broader, sorry, I'm going on quite a lot, you didn't ask me this question, should go much broader systematic change in the way that government uses information. So yeah, so the task force essentially is there as a sort of a carrot and a stick. We're very encouraging, we're very enthusiastic, we're full of expert, amazing people who provide good quality advice, but we're also there as a sort of enforcer to shift the way that behaviours and processes happen in government.
Brilliant. Let me pose you the challenge early. Okay, it's amazing. I mean, I'm an evaluator. I think this is a wonderful agenda in government. But will it make a difference? Won't politicians just do what they want anyway?
Well, yes, they do. And that's how democracy works. So ultimately, I'm a civil servant, and so my job is to do what politicians want, but then my job also is to sort of remind and guide them. So anyone who has been alive in the last 2 years has noticed the merry-go-round of ministers that we've had, and so I've had a whole host of ministers to report to, from Michael Gove, who absolutely loves evidence. He was one of the creators of some of our What Works centres, and in fact a big patron of What Works and the task force, to Jacob Rees-Mogg, who took, like, I can remember my first conversation with him was a very different conversation. But all politicians, and in fact, Jacob exactly said this to me, all politicians and civil servants want the same thing. So politicians want to get re-elected, so they want policies that work. Because like, if their thing works, it's doing what people want and it makes the public happy. And essentially civil servants also want the same thing, like we're tax-paying members of the public. So actually choosing the right language, choosing the right buttons, choosing the right way to frame what you're doing helps. So if it's a different flavour of government, you might be saying something totally different. It's about high quality services to the public. Whereas in other flavours, you might be saying things about efficiency and value for money, and this will help you structure. So yes, in some cases, you aren't going to do exactly what you want, but that's a democracy. And I think it's more about the way you frame it in order to get essentially what is the best for the public delivered.
Brilliant. We talked a little bit about, getting the evidence to inform politicians about what works. But a good quality evaluation can take a long time, and it doesn't always align with a political cycle. How do you square the circle?
I get asked this a lot. I'm very sorry for people that have got to wait 20 years. That HS2 is going to basically never publish. So essentially, you have to do two things. You have to, one, obviously the best time to have started an evaluation was maybe 10 years ago, but in many cases we can't go back in time, so we should just start them now. And you need to get enough buy-in to do that. So I know that it hurts and I know people don't want to do it, but if anything you can do to get interim results, anything you can do that helps feed them, because ultimately someone will say, well, you've been evaluating for 2 years, what do we know? Like, can you help us? Trying smaller things that help you, like, I don't know, a literature review, a systematic review, some early findings, something that keeps the drumbeat of information going. Otherwise, people will lose interest and your thing will get defunded. So you have to try to think about your audience, think about what they need, and in exactly the same way as you might tailor your different messages to different political audiences, you have to remember you're doing the evaluation for a reason. And ultimately, like, the reason is to get those results used. And so if that means trying to find different ways of presenting that information, finding different timelines, and saying, fine, like, this is a longer term goal, but in the meantime, I'm going to do these short things, do it, because it's for the greater good.
Brilliant. This is a big change. You're trying to really shift government somewhere here.
Yeah.
What do you think, based on your experience today, are the most important mechanisms for changing government? How do you get all these government departments to adopt evaluation at scale?
Yeah, so some government departments love us, some hate us, to be honest. And I think it very much depends on where they are in terms of maturity for evaluation. I mean, there's some departments that literally were created, 2 months ago, and some of them that have been very long-standing departments that have got a very good culture of evidence-based approaches. So actually, you need to nuance. It's the same things, and I'm sure you guys already know this, but you should think about nuancing your approach. So for some of them that already have really well-established evaluation cultures and really good sets of plans and processes, you don't really need to do that much. You just need to give them stretch and license and give them political support. So for them, it's about helping them do what they do best. For others, who were maybe earlier on in the journey, yes, sometimes for some ones that basically need a push, you need to use some of the harder levers that are available to you, but others, and in most cases, it's actually about helping people. So it's saying, great, okay, you don't know what this should look like. You don't know because you guys have never tried this type of evaluation approach. Let's come on in. We've got experts on our evaluation child's advice panel who can help you. We've got these other mechanisms. Most people respond better to encouragement than they do the hard stick. Sometimes you need a bit of both.
I think that's fair. You talked a little bit about not knowing, but there's also, I think there's the other side where we kind of now have relatively aggregate information across people who do evaluation or fund evaluation that, not everything works. And in fact, some of the stats go, 1 in 3 things, only 1 in 3 things on average show effect, 1 in 4 things. Mm-hmm. What are we learning from the evaluation that show no effect, and how are we learning it?
What are we learning from things that don't show an effect? So in fact, I'm doing a tour of civil service on how to fail well, to try to encourage people. I know I'm sure people will go to that talk. But it's a good thing, right? Because I think before, people love to shout about effects that work. Oh my God, my thing has got an amazing effect. And people were a bit shy about sharing effects that don't, like either show no effect at all or even negative effect. So I have been trying to open up the culture to celebrate things that don't work. In some cases, it's about trying to fit in with the current agenda on efficiency and productivity. And look, we're stopping waste by finding these things that don't work, and let's celebrate the fact that we can stop spending money on things that don't. A good example of that was one of our What Works centres for, oh my gosh, they've just merged now, they've got a really long name. I think Foundations. They showed that social workers in schools had no effect. And actually, DfE then has stopped funding those. Social workers in schools was a policy that schools liked and social workers liked, and so it was a good thing that we evaluated it, because otherwise it would have used the limited social workers resource. It is still harder. I think it's much harder for things that are politically favourable or that there isn't an appetite to stop them. So in those cases, it's more about variations. So we're never going to stop sending people to prison, but what variations in prison can you try that make that experience better? What can we do that helps sentencing options? So in many cases, it's about trying to share that information. In many cases, it's about holding it until there's an appetite to do something with that, or in many cases it's trying to change so that you are changing the way something's rolled out so it can have the best possible effect. Because sometimes just saying something doesn't work isn't a great answer, but saying this version of it works better than that is a much easier message to sell.
Brilliant. Now, a lot of what we talk about here are sort of evaluations of specific policies or specific programs. Are we at a risk of detracting from focusing on wider systems issues, how we change the system to get better results?
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry, but not enough to do something about it, that I'm the evaluation task force, not the research and evaluation task force. So I do appreciate that my enthusiasm and energy ends up being very much just into evaluation, and the other parts of the system sometimes get less attention. I'm unapologetic about the ruthless focus on evaluation because I feel we have to, and that just there isn't enough evaluation going on in government. But having said that, yes, the entire system of how do policymakers get the correct evidence to help them make a decision at the right time in a format that's understandable. Early on in my career, I think I understood that lots of people who work on research, they love their topic and they're full of caveating, and they try to make the perfect the enemy of the good enough, and so evidence never quite gets to people because people aren't confident enough to put it forward, and so then it ends up policymakers do things in a vacuum because they've got nothing, because nobody's willing to come forward and share what they know. Equally, sometimes it's harder on the other end to feed it back in because lots of turnover, and you sort of the person who was working on it has left, and how do you make sure knowledge, so there's all sorts of things that need to get fixed. I don't think government is alone in that, but maybe if we get evaluation right, it means that we can spread, that's a prototype, the rest of how the rest of government can work, and we can try to get like the other bits fixed along the way. It's difficult.
Well, I'm conscious I want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but one last cheeky one for me.
Yes.
What has been the most surprising evaluation finding that has informed decision making that you've come across?
Oh, that's informed decision making. Trying to think of something that's informed decision making. That I would say. Okay, so I worked on a trial of body-worn video cameras for police officers. So what works? Does it improve transparency? Does it improve the way that police officers and members of the public interact with each other? With nice, beautiful, large randomized control trial, cluster randomized control trial. Actually, there was a whole lot of really strong political support from it because of course, the more transparency along officer behaviour. But actually, the finding was that it doesn't really do a lot. It doesn't do a lot because actually, when you turn up, it can't collect that much great evidence. It's not going to catch that many people red-handed because police tend to turn up after the incident's happened. And the interaction on stop and search produced sort of limited results. And it did reduce complaints. But actually, the result was that it did improve public confidence, and actually it gave officers more confidence to do some of their activities. And so some of the main goals of it weren't achieved, but actually it was the peripheral findings on the edge that meant that it was enough evidence to create a full national rollout. So sometimes I think the things you think a program will do, it ends up not delivering, and the unintended consequences that it delivers end up being its selling point. So that was a very good policy to work on, and quite an interesting in terms of methods thing. But anyway, yes, I would say that.
Brilliant.
Probably there are better versions.
Very insightful. All right, so I've got a few questions here, and some of them echo some of the conversations we had, obviously. So someone said, they often find that evaluations are so long-term that their findings are no longer relevant by the time they come out.
Oh, that's impressive.
How can you manage this?
I'd say two things to that. I'd say there are hardly ever any new problems in government. They're all the same problems, so your findings will become relevant again. My guess is in about 5 years' time. So don't worry, it will be used. And also try the interim findings as much as it hurts, and as much as it sometimes can be misleading. I know, like, for example, the obesity injections, they cause weight loss early on, and then later people get fine, but that's a finding, right? That's still useful. You should never underestimate how useful the things that you know are to people.
Okay, I'm going to skip around them. It often seems that policy interventions focus on quick evidence approaches. How do you incorporate policy changes which acknowledge longer-term change?
So sometimes it's about getting your policy customers to trust you. So you need to get them, so yeah, fine. There's an insatiable appetite for information that is very quick now, and that's of course why lots of people turn to big data dashboards or things that will try to show them what is happening right now. I mean, for example, on the problems at the ports, they were literally tracking the number of cars that were queuing instead of maybe what works to reduce that issue more broadly. But once your policy customer gets something, once whoever it is you're talking to gets information that's useful, they'll keep using you as a trusted person. You become an authority. You'll be able to become somebody who they can go to for advice. And then your next piece of advice should be, what we really need to do is something longer. Let's set this up. Let's set up something longer so that we can, provide better quality evidence. Do not stop providing the short stuff, but in the background, you're constantly briefing for the longer term stuff. You're always pushing for that. So your future self will thank you for that, because otherwise you can get very distracted by the sort of sugar rush of constantly providing immediate information, but that's not going to help your long-term goals. And people will trust you to do that once you've built up a good relationship with them.
Brilliant. I think connected to that, so that as government evaluators, buy-in from policy colleagues is very important. What do you find is the best way to get this buy-in and engagement?
Everybody's a human, literally everybody. So try to find the personal thing about them. If you're dealing with somebody, try to find what's motivating them. Try to find, have a coffee with them, try and meet them, try and talk to them. I know they might be busy, I know they might, but try and engage with them, because actually people have got very different motivations. So it could be they're under pressure to deliver something, so your angle should be, let me help you make sure that delivery goes well, because it's impossible to deliver a full national rollout perfect first time. Or it could be they're genuinely been working on that policy area for a while and they're intrigued about what's working, in which case you'd push totally different buttons with those people. So talk to them, understand the person who's going to use your information, and try to find out how you can best frame and pivot what you're doing for them, and keep in touch with them. They will be grateful, they will be engaged with you, because they are also trying to dream the same dream as you.
Brilliant. There's so many lovely questions.
Oh, are there?
Here's one. In your opinion, are there accepted areas of what works and should be left alone, or does this also need to be evaluated as societies change?
Are there accepted things that work? There are so few things that are evaluated well that those things are very small, and there are some things that appear on toolkits that fine, you should leave alone. I repeated though that actually there is no new problems in the world. Mostly they're combinations of existing problems that just interface with new technology or some other new problem. So in many cases, that evidence should be applied into a new context. I'd say if you have a really limited budget though, focus on something else, but I would say that nothing's ever completely completely closed off.
Brilliant. Okay, I might rephrase one of these questions, which is basically sometimes evaluation can be like a tick box exercise. So it's kind of like always ask for whether or not it might be appropriate or the appropriate method. So how do we make sure that the evaluation is done well, and we don't spend money on poor evaluation, because it's also not obviously great use of money?
Yes. Was it Tinkerbell that said every time someone said fairies don't exist, one dies? I feel like every time someone says an evaluation is a tick box exercise, my heart dies, because it's correct. It's actually correct. My heart dropped every time. I'm the evaluation task force. It's my job to say these evaluations are a great thing, and that more of them should happen in government. And then I find one, and I'm like, who did this? Why would you do this? You had the opportunity to do a good quality evaluation or something that was going to fit, and instead you did this, and that's not. So yeah, in some cases those evaluations need to stop. If you are doing an evaluation where nobody's interested in the results, stop, because you're not feeding anybody, unless you genuinely believe that's an ongoing issue that will become an issue later. If you're doing something that doesn't stand a chance of getting any results at the end, stop. There are some bad evaluations out there that there's so few experts in evaluation and such little resource and time that can go into them. It's your responsibility to make sure that you use that resource wisely, because there's so many other things you could be doing with that time.
Brilliant. coming back to some of the earlier questions, we talked about actually your response about the body cam cameras. You know, if unintended consequences can be so powerful, how do we make sure we can capture those when designing an evaluation?
Yeah, good question. So clearly you need a good theory of change, you need to be understanding about the different mechanisms. I mean, this is like dream world stuff here, but it's possible. Try any early piloting so that you can try to pick up what those unintended consequences might be. Anything that you get like, I'm sure all of you do, you sometimes get a spidey sense of that things that might happen. You're like, oh, I think this new thing might do these things. Obviously, you don't want to confetti cannon an evaluation with hundreds of different outcome measures, but you probably want, I don't know, 3 primary outcomes that you are looking for, and that's still quite a lot. And then these other things you're just trying to pick up along the periphery, and that's why mixed methods is great, because you aren't just doing quantitative stuff, but you're actually picking up the wider stuff, and then that's your baton passing to someone else, because you're saying, hey, do you know what, we did this evaluation, we found this thing, but really in the broader qualitative stuff, I picked up that this could be an issue, and so, hey, future researcher, go ahead and look into that, because I think this is something worth exploring.
Okay. How can evaluators unlock the power of administrative data sets to support their evaluation?
I mean, this is not my strength, but yes, there are lots. Government has a lot of data, has got a large data sets that are very useful, and yes, you should use them.
How do you get your hands on them?
How do you? I think ONS are definitely working on making them more available. How would I guess also try to build a relationship with the departments you're working. Maybe you must have an alignment with departments. Yeah, that's not easy.
Okay. How do you stop people from cherry picking your evidence findings?
I mean, you can't. You're not the police in this instance, but so if you're outside of government and you find, I mean, there are like Full Fact and the Office for Statistical Regulation, who I guess you could go to if you really felt your stuff was being misrepresented. It's good. Evidence is being used, and I guess it's difficult, isn't it? Not to. We all do. We all look at stuff. In fact, it's the temptation, the reason we should all publish what our hypotheses are before, because basically that's the most tempting thing to do, is to look at the thing that works or not. If you're in government, then you should be writing good quality briefings. So you should be presenting that thing that works along with along with a reasonable number of health warnings before you, I'm going back on what I said before about not breaking too many caveats, but it's a really difficult balance, isn't it? But I guess it depends on if you think the cherry picking actually distorts the results. Like if you genuinely think that that's something that should change a behaviour, I think it depends on how much you would alter your response to it.
Brilliant. And before we kind of close out, a couple of career questions. So do you, for any sort of early careers or people thinking of shifting into evaluation, they should. Is there a piece of advice that you would give to someone pursuing a career in social research, and what would that be?
So if I was speaking to the younger version of myself, I would say, don't worry so much. Don't worry. I think people get very het up also about technical skills, and quite a lot of being a good evaluator is also having good social skills, to be able to present your findings well, to be able to engage people, to be able to enthuse them about it. So most of my job now is basically I'm a traveling saleswoman that goes around selling evaluation. But that's it, right? You need to make people interested. You need to get people, because you can do the most beautiful piece of evaluation, and unless you can get people to use it, it's just not going anywhere. So don't worry. I used to worry I didn't know every possible method, or I didn't my thing wasn't quite perfect. But just do it. The thing you're working on is great. There are opportunities. Don't ever. Don't be scared about leaving your comfort bubble. Do something else. I remember when I first moved into international development, I knew nothing about international development. There was all these people I thought were perfect floating around me who'd worked in Afghanistan doing these I don't know, and in some mountains with a goat or something. I don't know, but they were doing things, and I was like, oh, I don't know anything about this. It doesn't matter. You've got transferable skills, so don't don't let your fears like hold you back. Get a really broad experience and use the softer skills just as much as the technical skills, and then use your networks. Like, use people you know. Don't be scared to ask people for mentoring or to ask them to shadow or to see something else, because 9 times out of 10 they will be more than happy to do it. And if they're the 1 out of the 10, then you don't want to be like in their bubble anyway. So like, use the network, like approach people, engage them, and be like, have the career that you want those younger generations to have, because like, the evaluation task force didn't exist before. There was no like version of me. You have to sometimes make the jobs you want. So you can definitely do it even if the future version of you doesn't exist yet.
So on that inspirational note, I will wrap us up. Thank you so much, Catherine.
Thank you.
It's been absolutely wonderful.